Hi 8th graders, it's Mr. Castleman with another video. Today we're going to be looking at Chapter 4, Sections 7, 8, and 9. We'll be reading through those sections and then also completing the guided reading notes, the ISN notes for those sections. Alright, so you're going to need your Chromebook logged into TCI, opened up to Chapter 4. You're going to need your interactive student notebook for Chapter 4, Section 7, and something to write with. All right, so Section 7 is all about education. Except in New England, most children in the colonies received little formal education. Neither the middle nor the southern colonies had public schools. In the southern colonies, most families were spread out along rivers. A few neighbors might get together to hire a teacher for their children. Wealthy planters often hired tutors to educate younger children at home. Older children were sent to schools in distant cities, or even England, to complete their education. In the middle colonies, religious differences among Quakers, Catholics, Jews, and Baptists, and other religious groups slowed the growth of public education. Each religious group or family had to decide for itself how to educate its children. Some groups built church schools. Others were content to have parents teach their children at home. Only in New England were towns required to provide public schools. The Puritans' support for education was inspired by their religious faith. They wanted their children to be able to read the Bible. To encourage education, Massachusetts passed a law in 1647 that required every town with 50 families or more to hire an instructor to teach their children to read and write. Towns with more than 100 families were required to build a school. Similar laws were passed in other New England colonies. Parents were asked to contribute whatever they could to the village school. Contributions might be money, vegetables, firewood, or anything else the school needed. Often land was set aside as school meadows or school fields. This land was then rented out to raise money for teachers' salaries. Schools were one-room buildings with a chimney and fireplace in the center. There were no boards to write on or maps. Pencils and paper were scarce. Students shouted out spelling words and wrote sums in ink on pieces of bark. There were usually one book, the New England Primer, which was used to teach the alphabet, syllables, and prayers. Most colonists believed that boys needed more education than girls. Female education in the best families, wrote First Lady Abigail Adams, went no further than than writing and arithmetic. In some few and rare instances, music and dancing. Okay, so that's section 7. Now let's take a look at the notes. So we don't need to do this first question. We already talked about that headline in class. But we will look at this question, number 2. Explain how education was provided in each region, and put a star next to the region in which people supported public education because of their religious faith. All right, well, we know New England colonies were the ones who supported public education because of their religious faith, because we just read about it, so you can put a star right next to that one. But let's explain how education was provided in each region. Okay, so in the New England colonies, every town with 50 or more families had to hire a teacher. Towns with 100 or more families had to build a school. All right, let's talk about the middle colonies. So we're talking about Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey. So In the middle colonies, every religious group or family had to decide whether to build a school or educate children at home. So there weren't public schools in the middle colonies. Not yet, at least. Now, in the southern colonies, a few neighbors might hire a teacher together. Tutors were also hired, and sometimes people went to schools in other cities. So we could say in the southern colonies that a few neighbors might hire a teacher. Some families, especially rich families, would hire a tutor. It's basically like a private teacher that just works with one person or a couple people. Now, question number 3 asks, name 2 ways in which a colonial school in New England was different from your school. So you guys can choose any of the things we read about. Remember, we read about how schools were one-room buildings with a chimney and fireplace in the center. There were no smart boards, obviously, or chalkboards even, no maps even, and then pencils and papers were scarce too. There's also usually just one book, for example, in New England. They use something called the New England Primer. So you could choose one of those or 2 of those ways that describe how a colonial school in New England was different from your school. All right, we're going to go on to section 8 next. I'm going to go up here, section 8, colonial families. The concept of family has changed often throughout history. Today, most people think of a family as being made up of parents and their children. In colonial times, however, families might include grandparents, aunts and uncles, cousins, and stepchildren. Marriage. Colonial men and women generally married in their early to mid-20s. Those who arrived in America as indentured servants were not allowed to marry until they had gained their freedom. Men outnumbered women throughout the colonies. As a result, almost every woman was assured of receiving a marriage proposal. Maidservants of good, honest stock, which means family, wrote a colonist, could choose their husbands out of the better sort of people. For a young woman, though, life as a wife and mother often proved to be even harder than life as an indentured servant. Large families. Colonial families were generally large. Most families had between 7 and 10 children. Benjamin Franklin had 16 brothers and sisters. Farm families, in particular, needed all the hands they could to help with chores. Religious and cultural backgrounds influenced colonists' ideas about raising children. But almost everywhere in the colonies, children were expected to be productive members of the family. Married women gave birth many times, but nearly half of all children died before they reached adulthood. Childhood deaths were especially high in the middle and southern colonies, where the deadly disease of malaria raged. Adults often died young as well. After the death of a wife or husband, men and women usually remarried quickly. Thus, households often swelled with stepchildren as well as adopted orphans. Those are children whose parents had died. Whether colonists lived in cities and villages or on isolated farms, their lives focused on their families. Family members took care of one another because there was no one else to do so. Young families often welcomed elderly grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins into their homes when they could no longer care for themselves. It didn't matter if there was barely enough room for everyone. No one could turn away a needy relative. Okay, let's take a look at the notes here. Now we can cross out section 8. Question 1, we're not going to do that. The question 2 is, give one interesting fact about colonial marriage and tell how marriage in the U.S. today is different. Well, we could split our little answer into colonial marriage and marriage today. So I'm going to create a little table here. So let's write something about colonial marriage right here. Well, one interesting thing is that people generally married in their early to mid-20s. In early to mid-20s. It's also kind of interesting how if you're an indentured servant, you couldn't get married. So indentured servants couldn't marry. Those were people who basically had signed a contract saying that they would work for somebody for a certain amount of years and they wouldn't get paid. So they were indentured servants and they couldn't go and do something else until they had completed those years that they'd agreed to serve. Now, marriage today, I'd say that people marry at all ages. And you can get married, it doesn't matter what your social status is. There's no like, nobody, unless you're really young, you can get married. Okay, question number 3. What is one reason why colonial families were so large? Well, farm families needed all the help they could get. So that's definitely one reason. Farm families needed lots of help, including from kids. Also, there's another reason. I know we only needed one, but yeah, we can write another one down. Some families had a lot of stepchildren in them. And that was because a lot of people died young. So if you were married and your spouse died, you would want to get remarried. And then when you got remarried, you might join a family. You might marry somebody who already had some kids from their previous marriage. So those kids would become your stepkids. So families could get bigger and bigger as this happened. All right, we can skip question number 4. And let's go to the last section we're going to look at, section 9. All right, section 9, leisure. While most colonists worked hard, they enjoyed their periods of leisure. That's time away from work. They also took advantage of gatherings, such as town meetings and Sunday services, to talk with neighbors and make friends. Bees and frolics. When possible, colonists combined work and play by organizing bees and frolics. New settlers might hold a chopping bee, in which all the neighbors helped clear the trees off their land. Other frolics included corn husking bees for men and quilting bees for women. Sharing the work made it faster and more fun. The Germans introduced house and barn raisings to the colonies. At these events, neighbors joined together to build the frame of a house or barn in one day. The men assembled the 4 walls flat on the ground and then raised them into place. Meanwhile, the women prepared a huge feast. At the end of the day, everyone danced on the barn's new floor. Toys and sports. Colonial children had a few simple toys, such as dolls, marbles, and tops. They played tag, blind man's bluff, and stool ball, which was related to the English game of cricket, which is a game that's kind of like baseball. Children in New England also enjoyed coasting down snowy hills on sleds, so sledding. Adults must have thought coasting was dangerous because several communities forbade it, which means they didn't let you do it. Adults enjoyed several sports. Almost every village had a bowling green. Here, men rolled egg-shaped balls down a lane of grass toward a white ball called a jack. Colonists also played a game similar to backgammon called tic-tac, and a form of billiards or pool called trock. In the southern colonies, fox hunting with horses and hounds was a popular sport. Card playing was another favorite pastime, one that New England Puritans disapproved of strongly. Horse racing, cockfighting, and bull baiting were also popular in the South. Cockfighting is when you make chickens fight, like roosters fight. Fairs were held throughout the colonies. At these events, colonists competed in contests of skill and artistry. There were foot races, wrestling matches, dance contests, and wild scrambles to see who could win a prize by catching a greased pig or climbing a greased pole. All right, sounds pretty fun. All right, let's take a look at the notes for section 9. Once again, we're not going to do this first question, so you can cross that off. Now, question number 2 is to write a definition for the bee that was described in this section. Well, we can say that a bee was an event where colonists got together to do some work and have some fun. So a quilting bee, for example, would be a gathering where people got together and they made quilts, but they all did it together, so it was kind of fun because you had a bunch of people together, maybe you had a meal, and some fun conversation. Okay, question number 3 is to draw and label 2 leisure activities you would have enjoyed as an American colonist. Now, we heard about a lot of different leisure activities, from billiards, which is like pool, to trying to catch a greased pig or going to a fair. Maybe you would have been interested in playing bowling on like a lawn bowling kind of game. So draw and label 2 leisure activities that you would have enjoyed if you were an American colonist. And that's it for section 9 and for chapter 4. Thanks for watching the video, guys. And if you have any questions, be sure to shoot me an email or ask me in class. Okay, see you later.